Hello, hello, hello. My no more people pleasing family. I think we're live and in effect. Today, we are going to be talking about a very important topic, as all the topics are important. Let me ask you this. Have you ever just kind of walked into a room and been somewhat concerned or overly concerned about what you look like, how you appear, what people might have to say, what they may think? Have you ever had the opportunity to speak on the job and been overly concerned about the opinions of others? Are you often concerned about the opinions of others in the presence of maybe your romantic partners, family, and things like that? And some of us, are you even uncomfortable around your own children? Well, we know that that can be a big problem for some of us, and we're going to talk about it today and talk about some ways to overcome it. And so the topic is how to stop worrying about what other people think about you. Um, and so that's what we're going to get into. Have you ever been preoccupied with the thoughts about everyone else and what they're thinking? And have you asked yourself at any point, where did this come from? Where did this come from? Um, we do it. A lot of times we're not aware where it comes from. And what happens is, because we're not aware of where it comes from, the risk, the probability of us passing this on to our children, and for some of you all, even grandchildren now, is very high. Why? Because many times we perpetuate the same things that we experience. A lot of times we're not even consciously aware of how some of these things impacted us and how we got to the place where we are today. And so what we do, a lot of times all the time in counseling and coaching, is we go through what's called a discovery phase. And this is a phase where we kind of talk with you about the things that's been going on and help you with coming to an understanding of where this came from, what it is, and then we start moving into what to do about it. But first, before we do anything, I like to try to understand and find out how we develop the type of thinking that we do. That makes it easier to change it, because sometimes the reason in how we develop the way that we think, it's been based on something that we might not even agree with or think is kind of stupid at this point. Why? Because when we were a child, we developed that way of thinking, not understanding, like, when certain things happen to us, that the people that many times shaped our way of thinking. We call this introjection in the sciences, and introjection is primarily a situation to where we take on the beliefs of others. So in other words, if mom thinks this way about me, or if dad thinks this way about me, then that must be who I am. And as a young child, unfortunately, we don't have the ability, when we're really young, to, when things are being done or judgments are being placed on us that are unrealistic or harmful, we're not able to determine that, you know what, mom or dad is just really having some issues right now. They may have their own mental health challenges, and so I'm not going to take that on myself. Okay, so our automatic response is to believe it. We really just most of the time don't know any other way, and that's called introjection. We actually take on the belief that has been imposed on us, by someone else. And that's why um, parents have such a powerful role in the influence of their children, because children are very, very impressionable, and it's a big deal. And now we're big kids, because some of us are still stuck in that stage when something happened to us, when we developed this faulty way of thinking, and we have not developed into a more mature way of thinking and understanding that some of these false beliefs that I've been thinking about myself, they're really not true, and someone just basically threw them on me. And because I didn't know how to protect myself. I didn't know how to reason because I was so young. I've taken it on and I've been believing it, and it's been causing problems in my relationships ever since. Is that I'm wondering if that's something that you may have experienced up to this point, if you've been experiencing people pleasing. So we expect for this information to not just help you, but to help you with your children, if you have any, and your grandchildren, if you have grandchildren at this point, because we got a lot of grandmothers in the group. Big ups to the grandmothers. Shout out to the grandmothers. All right. All right. So 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 a lot of us, I want to ask you the question, um, were you raised by a very critical parent? Okay. I want you to think about that. Were you raised by a very critical parent? And when I say critical, it doesn't mean that they were very critical of you. It just means that they were very critical. Um, and I'm going to go over a couple of ways that this might have looked for some of us. Now, this is not everybody's experience, but in some way, I think all of us can relate with it, especially if you had a perfectionist parent. Okay. You just needed one. Okay. If you had a perfectionist parent, this could impact you as well. And so we're talking about some ways in which we've gotten to the point to where we're overly concerned about what others are thinking about us and how we kind of move through that. Well, here's the discovery, right? So when we talk about, I want you to think about if you had a very critical parent and you were a young child, just looking from the outside in, um, how much or what kind of bearing might that have on the psyche of the child? A child who really is somewhat helpless, dependent, trusting of that parent to teach and train them in the best way possible. And this is what I need you all to understand. A lot of times, this is what your parents did their best to do. They just did not have the tools. Some of you all right now are not to the point when we're in discovery of being able to accept that, to discover it, to even explore it and look at it as an option. And let me tell you, if you don't, for many of you who are in the people pleasing mode, this will be a big, huge barrier to your development, um, because it shows up in different ways, but we don't have time to get into that. All right. So I want you to think about the psychological impact of an overly critical parent, what that might have on a child. And so let's just say you had an overly critical parent and they make a statement like, look at her, she's so lazy. All right. And maybe this is just something that they talked about quite a bit because of their beliefs about lazy people. For some reason, in their experience, they were impacted in a way that lazy people really bothered them. So, what ends up happening many times is lazy people can end up impacting me because I'm being influenced by a parent. So, one way this might impact me is that I have a fear of being lazy, or I I have so much of a fear of being lazy. Um, I've gotten to the point to where I really can't relax, and this was something that happened as a child because you didn't want to be seen as being lazy, and so you found yourself being overly useful or helpful for a parent, always trying to help out because you knew that your parent did not like laziness. They may have not been overly critical to you about being lazy, but you knew that they had a pet peeve about laziness. And because it's just the natural way of a child to want to please the parent, then without them even stating anything, then we start taking action to make sure that we don't fit into that category. This is something that I haven't really talked a lot about, because usually it's the more, I don't want to say the opposite of covert, but obvious things that parents can do that we can see. But some things are kind of somewhat covert versus overt. That's the word I was looking for. So here's another example. She'll never amount to anything. Talking about somebody else, right? But then that instills within me just consequence as a consequence that I've got to be somebody myself. So then a lot of times the pressure is put on, the pressure to perform, the pressure to meet mom or dad's demands, or meet mom or dad's the things that I feel that would please them. So you had a dad that just was just really stern about success, about getting it right, about, making something of yourself. And this is what they spoke about. They may not have directly come to you about it. Most of the time they would. Most of the time, the experience would be that they would. But even if they didn't, it's just an intuitive way, or a natural way that we respond many times. If this is what's in the room, if this is the spirit of the room, this is the spirit that the parents have, then I'm wanting to go along with it, unless you was a super rebel, which we have some of those as well. Whatever your parents said, you just went against. Okay, but we're not talking about that today. That'll be another session here. Um, here's another one. She's too emotional. No one takes her seriously. So hearing a parent, a dad, or a mom express that someone's too emotional can have a huge implication. I remember one of my supervisees had spoke about a situation like this where she was taught not to let anybody know that they got the best of her. And so if she was hurting, she learned to smile. So she might actually be in pain, and then she's smiling. That sounds kind of psycho, right? But this is really, she talked about this in our supervision, and she also talked about that the body, a lot of times when it's trained to hide pain in a dysfunctional way, it works in really strange ways. And this is what she said happened to her. She said that she went to the emergency room. Her mom took her to the emergency room, and she had some redness and swelling around her arm, but she didn't even feel it. She didn't even feel it. And long story short, she found out that they I think they end up leaving the emergency room and then coming back. They were just drawn to, like, no, it's something going on, there's something wrong. And they went back, and after they did the x-rays and everything, they found out that her wrist was fractured, that she had a fractured bone. And what had happened is that she discovered that she had learned so much um, by her parents to hide her pain, that the body just at some point didn't understand how to separate um, emotional pain from physical pain. And that's something. And this is why where the autoimmunes and things like that happen. It starts with the mind. She was not able to any longer separate the emotional pain from the physical pain. So her mind essentially was programmed that when you experience pain, regardless of whether it's a physical pain or an emotional pain, that you hide it. In other words, you become desensitized to even knowing that the pain exists. And how many of you all are experiencing right now that you have been desensitized to even knowing about your own pain? Like, you don't even argue anymore. You don't fuss anymore. You don't say anything. You don't even know what you like or dislike at this point if you were to have it your way. Some of us are like that. And sometimes this is where it begins, when someone around you, not trying to be emotionally abusive or anything, but they felt like, oh, people too emotional. They just need to get themselves together, pull themselves up, and just take it. And so then you learn that when you are hurt, when things happen to you, and some of you all very bad things happen, and you know what you learn to do? Keep it shut, right? And so this is another way that the people pleasing cycle begins. She's always making bad decisions. So you're hearing that in the home from mom or dad, which makes you get to the point to where you feel like, I've got to make the right decisions. So you turn into a little perfectionist at an early age, and it goes into adulthood, because once it's developed, it hardly ever fades. I'm somewhat of a perfectionist myself, or I won't say somewhat. I'm a perfectionist myself, but I'm a recovering one, because I'll screw up stuff, and it just is what it is. Like, we just doing one take. So forgive me for any false information that you might get. Uh, but perfectionism, a lot of times this is the way that it's developed. okay? Because you had a perfectionistic parent, or you had a parent that was very opinionated, very judging, and they may not have been emotionally or physically abusive, but because of their state of mind and their way of thinking, then you also became that way. Okay. And here's the last one. She's not pretty enough to get a good husband. Ooh. Now see that one right there? Yeah, dad wouldn't have had to say that that is you or anything like that. It's just the standard. So what does that do for a child? What does that make them start to think many times if dad or mom states something like that? They start to think that being married means somewhat of a has something to do with somewhat of a superficial relationship. This doesn't always happen, but this is by far not an extreme. So we start to think of things superficially. So I'm just worried about my outside, have very little focus on my inside, because I guess what? I don't even know, that has no value. What's most valuable is how I present, not who I am. So then we get to the externals, we get to the superficial. So not only am I trying to look good, but then I'm trying to please, but then deep down inside, I'm torn apart because the things that I need, the things that will make me happy, the things that keep me from being hurt, I really am not in touch with that because I've been programmed to think from externals or superficial. Okay. And so these are some things that end up happening. And so one of the things is that if you if you've heard these things from your father, you you may idealize what your father's preferences are concerning a woman, and then try to satisfy that. So this is my idea of what a woman should be, what a woman should do, how a woman should function. Okay, how a woman should express herself, how a woman should just demonstrate emotions, what a woman's place is. A lot of times predetermined. When a lot of times doesn't have to be any abuse going on. Okay, but then we develop these dysfunctional ways, these people pleasing ways, because of the temperature of the parent. Okay, and then if it's the mother, you may idealize what you believe the mother would expect, and then this defines for you how a woman should be. A woman, a woman should be what mom thinks she should be. So that's when the identity is stripped. And this is only when things are imbalanced. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being influenced by your parents, but for positive things, in perspective, in balance. Okay, but I'm talking about the things that cause people pleasing. It's not a balance there, right? Okay, and so it's important to understand that this is how it starts. So this can give you an idea of some of the things that you may actually be doing as well that could be influencing your children, that can be influencing your grandchildren. Because what we do, we just take on many times unconsciously, we take on the actions of our parents, right? So outside, I want you to think as an intervention, right? And this we get down to intervention mode. Outside of the influence of what, outside of the influence, let's say, of your parents, of or of other people, I want you to start thinking about, what do you think about you? Okay? Think about that for a moment. Outside of the influence of your parent or other people, what is it that you truly think about yourself? This is what we need to start processing, because many times when we don't have a any identity or a firm identity, much of what we believe is good or bad about ourselves is primarily established by what others think. So we have an external control situation. Okay. They call it external locus of control. Basically, that I don't have any control over what happens to me, except so in other words, if you believe this is what I am, then that's what I am. But when we have more of an internal ability to control things, then we don't allow for others to dictate or demonstrate how we should be. We choose that for ourselves. So if when you ask the question, when we ask the question, you answered what, outside of your, outside of your influences, what do you think about you? And this can be about situations, scenarios, about decisions. What do you think about that idea that you had? What do you think about that decision that you made? Because sometimes we're hearing the voice of the parent. And sometimes it's not always a good voice. We want to establish after we have discovery, and this is a part of discovery. We're discovering there's a problem. We're trying to discover where it came from. It's a problem, where the problem come from. That's where we are right here. And this is now we're going into the mode of intervention, okay, to resolve this concerning situation. So if what you are thinking about yourself is negative, then I want you to just do this simple intervention. If it's something negative that you think about you, I want you to just do this. And this may be a struggle for some of you all, but I don't care. I need you to do it. All right. What is a possible positive alternative that might also be true? Okay. This is just you and you talking. What is a possible positive alternative that may also be true? And I want you to start focusing on those possible positive alternatives other than that negative alternative. And this will help to neutralize the situation because this is not something that you just created or made up. This is something that you actually believe could be a possible positive alternative uh, in the direct opposite of that negative stuff that keeps popping up and populating every time when we start thinking about what we think about ourselves. So some of us have been conditioned to have an unconditional some of us have not been conditioned to have an unconditional love for ourselves. But the good news is that all conditioning can be changed. And we're going to end it right here. I hope that this has been helpful. Just remember a possible positive alternative. Remember to be thinking about why I'm being influenced to think this way about myself. Where did that come from? What are some of the messages that I used to hear in the environment that I was in? And then we're thinking about change. What can I do to change it? And y'all know what to do. Feel free to reach out if you need some support. We're going to end it here. Y'all take care. Until next time. All right. Bye bye.